Yeah, and I totally see that, and I just to echo, I think that the greatest thing, what I try to sell folks on with the coach approach, is that it builds capacity, right? You do not work as hard when you have a team full of people who can think for themselves, problem solve for themselves, be introspective, are thinking about the other person, other team. And I think that's what coaching does, right? And so having that ability for people, like you mentioned, we have our own expertise. Well, just like the coaching philosophy says, we have the answers to our problems or to our issues. It's very often, how often do we get a chance to really think about it? I think that's what the feedback I've gotten from my clients is that, I never get a chance to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
I never have an hour to talk to somebody about this stuff, right? And
Hmm.
and the stuff is not widgets and stats and metrics and semiconductors and pushing stuff out. It's about, what do I do with my staff member who, is upset that he has to come in 3 days a week now instead of two, right? Or that this person doesn't have a work style that matches with the rest of us, or, just those things, those soft skills that, are hard to measure for people. And the coaching piece, if we are truly using it right, it's not about the production, directly. It's about what builds that production, which is, we measure products. Well, who pushes out those products? People, right? And people, whether you are, a type A with a supercomputer for a brain, right? Or a type B with, that chases butterflies and squirrels all day like me, right? We all need to be able to process what we're taking in and what it means to us, not just the hard end result, but how we get there. And that's such an important piece. That's what I sell leaders on. Hey, look, if we use the coach approach, you'll have people coming to you less, right? You won't have people that have to hang on every word that you say, right? Or come to you for every problem, which is exhausting and it takes you away from the work that you have to do. If you have scheduled regular meetings, which is something that, is so important for folks, to have those regular meetings so that they have less of those knock on the door interactions, which take you away from what you were doing. It frees you up to be able to get your stuff done, and you can go on vacation, and rather, when you're sitting at the pool, rather than having your phone in your hand, you can have your mai tai in your hand, right? Just because you're not worried about the building blowing up while you're gone. And so teaching people or getting people to buy into the fact that coaching builds critical thinking, coaching builds self understandings of solutions that they can approach, or who to ask, and to be able to ask and approach people in a way that is not threatening to them, where they feel like, oh, I don't want to ask too many questions, I don't want to look like I don't know something, right? To be open and engaging, it actually makes those engagements less frequent but more meaningful. And that's it's a tough one to it's a tough needle to thread for some folks who are just about, numbers, 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 stats, 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 call times, sales, right? And all of those. I had a conversation with somebody who said, yeah, well, yeah, that's fine and talking, but we are supposed to have an average of 2 minutes for each customer engagement on the phone. And I said, well, do you have some customer engagements that go more than 2 minutes? Well, yeah, a lot of them do. I said, well, how often are they beneficial? Well, a lot of times they're beneficial. I said, okay, well, and you're going to, you know, mark this person as not being a good employee or up to standard for helping somebody resolve an issue and to keep them as a customer. Well, I don't know how to quantify that. So that's a hard thing. How do I put a number on that? How do I make that a tangible result that I can see and that I can also sell as I'm going up the chain, right? And I think that's hard, because like you said, we're connections are currency, and we are less connected. And so what else is there? What else is currency? Production, right? And so how do we get people to buy into having those conversations that lead them to recognize how they come together and how they merge, right? Which improves production, improves not just production, but improves retention, right? And less turnover, right? We know if you have one person at work that you can talk to and let your hair down and they can provide you non-judgmental, empathetic support, they stay at their job longer and they're more productive. How do we get people to buy into the fact that that is something that if they don't have it within them to do that, that they, can schedule that, to practice that? How do we get them to really see the relevance in that when they were taught no news is good news, right?
Mm. Well, when I talk to like new leaders, right? This is like my specific um audience. My preferred audience are people who are newer into the leadership roles that are really looking to develop good habits from the beginning. And so when we have conversations around coaching and what it is and how to do it, for me, I usually just in a very simple explanation, it's the ability to ask open-ended questions and listen, right? And listen. And it's amazing like how challenging that is. You would think like just asking open-ended questions would be something simple. It's really, really difficult. The other part of this that I think is important to discuss is number one, not everybody is coachable,
Right.
right? Not everyone's going to be coachable. And two, if people have been in a position to never have experienced coaching or they don't know that the coach approach is what we're doing here, they might be a little bit suspicious. So
Hmm.
if I come to you and I'm like, Michelle, how do I do X, Y, and Z? And you're like, well, we've done it before, and I know you've done it before. So what have you tried? Why can't you just tell me the answer? Right? Why can't you just tell me what to do, Michelle? I just, if I'm trying to kind of coach you through your own skill set and build your confidence, I may not be willing to just give you the answer, right? I don't want to rescue you. I want to put you in a position. So for people who are really starting the coach approach, I want them to really like know it's not easy. And if people are feeling uncomfortable, then you know it's working. That's the key here is that when it's discomfort for the sake of growth. And it's just like when you go to the gym and you build muscles, like if you've ever had a really good leg day, you know you're going to walk like a baby deer the next day. It was uncomfortable. It's a little bit of pain, but that's how you grow, that's how you develop, and that's going to be the same for you from a leadership perspective when you take on that coach approach. Like we've really kind of conditioned people, ask a question, get an answer, you don't have to think for yourself, and then you can put in your documentation, per Carl did this, per Michelle took this action. That way if it's not the right one, we know who to blame, right? I have to take no accountability. So when you're like, Michelle, I'm confident in your ability. What do you think is the right thing to do here?
Mhm.
That's going to freak people out a bit because they're not used to having that type of autonomy to make choices for themselves. And that's something for us to think about in the for that coach approach. We have to be kind of transparent with this is the approach I'm taking. I believe in you. I want to hold you capable. I know you have a lot of things to add, so we can't just like I don't know, sideswipe people with coaching questions without some kind of conversation around those expectations. And this is why, as coaches, we have coaching agreements. This is why we have discussions before we start the coaching to say, this is what I'm responsible for. This is what you're responsible for. This is how the process is. So people have that level of understanding. It doesn't just feel like, how come my boss all of a sudden doesn't want to tell me the answers? How come my boss all of a sudden is curious and asking me all these questions? Are they trying to catch me? Are they what are they writing down over there? Why are they writing down my answers? Because it's not going to build trust unless we have a bit of transparency in like how and what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think that's an important conversation to have as well.
Yeah, Michelle, I've shared that. I actually saw that. I was working with a coachee from Kalosha, and she did her regular, where she established one-on-one meetings and was using coaching open-ended questions, and her direct stopped her about 10 minutes in and said, "Wait, what are you doing? What did I do something wrong? What are you trying to get out of me?" And she said it took her, and she said, I explained it to her what we were doing and that I was trying something different and that it was supposed to help. And then it became better. But just going, like you said, just going into it blind, Tiff. I mean, because it's a different paradigm than us who were raised with, defend yourself. If you're going to your boss's office, you must have done something wrong, right? And so, how do you approach that where you're not defensive? And that the coach approach really does help that, And so, yeah, that's yeah, I totally was echoing what you were saying there, Tiff. But yeah, so Tiff, I mean, so Michelle, how do you
Well,
do that? How
I
do you set
love
that
what
stage?
Tiff is saying, but my
Yeah.
mind went to it's not only is it the coach approach and creating that trust and safety with them with what you're doing, but it's bigger, right? The environment or the organization has to have psychological safety for them, and it has to allow them to be able to take chances and to try things and to fail. And that failure is okay because failure is growth, right? And if
Right.
the organization does not allow that, it's very hard to do a coach approach. And that's the bigger problem I think we have is most of our large corporations, I mean, in all industries, because I've seen it in all of them, because I've worked across tech, healthcare, and government this last 10 years, and none of them have that where they feel that they can take a chance, that they could
Mhm.
try something, and if it fails, that it'll be okay for the failure to get the learning and the growth. So they tend to still do a lot of that. I'm going to give you the answer because I don't want to have to answer a whole bunch of questions up above if it fails.
I agree
So
with you.
so how do we, I think it's more of what do you think we need to do to help the bigger environment shift and change? Because that's where we'll get the most growth out of people, is if that environment allows people to have failure in there as a learning opportunity, right? Um, you know, I don't know.
That's where I really see the coaching mindset as one that needs to be adopted culture wise. So like organizational culture is so important. Um, Carl has a lot of different experience, but most of my adult life, I've worked in government. And I've worked in government in very compliance-based systems. So there's rules, there's regulations, there's policies and procedures, and you cannot deviate from those things. And so what happens is that the culture of these said organizations become very much um,
Mm.
rooted in being right. Like your value is in being right. So
Mhm.
whoever knows the rules, the regulations, the policies, and the procedures most effectively is are the people who have the most currency in the systems. And so there's like a lot of pressure to be right. And what happens is that people become very righteous in that being right, and they stop learning.
Mhm.
And um, even when within compliance-based programs, the shift I think has to be in the culture of yes, we have to stay in compliance, and yes, we have to follow these rules and regulations because that's tied to our funding, that's tied to our our strategy, and at the same time, we also have to look at like what are the objectives of these programs? What are we trying to do? What's the vision? Like, what's the purpose? And find like some balance in how do we achieve the purpose within the rules and regulations without becoming like tied to them so deeply. And so if I, for example, have a client in front of me who is maybe struggling with homelessness, and the purpose is to like improve quality of life for this family and maybe get them into some housing. I don't want to be tied to these rules and regulations in the sense that how do I make sure I don't do anything wrong, and maybe make sure all of the red tape is in the right places and jump through the right hoops? How do we instead like create the culture of how do I stay within these guidelines but not make it so difficult for this family, right? How do I navigate through and not put up more barriers, but how do I get through these barriers? How do I learn the rules, regulations, and policies and procedures so greatly that I can use them to help people more efficiently versus trying not to get a procedural error, trying not to get a ding on my audit for not putting the data in the right box, right? Those are the things that I think the culture has to shift, because I'm not going to pretend that rules, regulations, and policies and procedures and compliance don't matter, because they do. Like at Apple, you can't just say, I'm going to code it like this because it feels right. Like there's certain things that have to be done a certain way,
That's
and that
right.
both can exist in the same space, both can exist. But this is where I think that coaching mindset comes in. Can you be open minded? Maybe this is the way it's been done for 20 years and it's worked for us for 20 years and it's no longer serving us. Can we look at it a different way? How can I be non-judgmental? Someone comes in and says, oh, I have a bright idea. How about if we try it this way? And not me say, that'll never work. That'll never work. I've been here most of my life and that's never worked. It's never going to work. Like it might. Let's try it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we can learn from it, right? Like, or like someone used to always tell, I'm a rule breaker, Michelle. I think you've learned that about me. I do what I want. And people used to say, well, where does it say you could do that? And I would always say, well, where does it say I couldn't do that? Right? Where does it say I can't do it that way? Because I'm willing to try and make mistakes over and over and over again, with some of the negative consequences that come with it organizationally. But not everybody is willing to do that. And this doesn't make me superior. It just, I just means this is who I am. And so when the culture allows for people to experiment and be able to report back to say, I know you said you wanted those call times under 2 minutes. And so here's what I tried on the last call. Instead of doing that product offer at the end, I just said, is anything else I can do for you today while you got me on the phone? And then let them go. Yeah, but you didn't offer I worked for the phone company. That was my very first job. And we used to get dinged all of the time. Like, you didn't offer them call
Oh,
waiting.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You didn't offer them call waiting because they didn't call about call waiting. They called about paying their phone bill. And so I helped them with that and said, thank you. Have a good day. So it's like those are the things where I think there's got to be a culture of experimentation without the judgment. And that's where the leadership can take that on to say, I want to give you some authority or some ability to influence the way that your job works. And then we're going to check in and find out what's working and what's not working and use that to shape the way that we do business. But we still can put parameters on that, right? We still have to be able to put in some guardrails, but not make it so limiting that we're not allowing people that space to think for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because amazing things happen when you give people a bit of autonomy.
Yeah.
I mean, watch, I don't know what the movie's called. You'll have to forgive me, but there's a movie about the guy who invented the flaming hot chip line
Mm.
at Doritos,
Mm-hmm.
or
Cheetos.
Frito-Lay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he kind of like learned the stuff so he could introduce this new thing. And imagine if they had said, you're just a janitor, which they did, by the way, for many, many years. You're just a janitor. Who are you to tell us what to do? Imagine, I think that's probably their most best-selling line at this point. So where we allow people to kind of break through and look towards the future within, again, the parameters that we set, that's where we start to see that magic happen. But as soon as we start to, well, who told you you could do that? Or where did you read? What policy are you following? Like I think that's where we lose people. So we have to have that culture of innovation.
It does a
Yeah.
couple of things. You lose them, and then or people become very complacent, right?
Right.
They just stay in the lane and they don't go on or above. They just
Yeah.
stay in the lane. I've
Exactly.
seen a lot of that. Um,
Yep.
but it reminded me of a time where I worked on FTC compliance a lot, and so I worked with our legal attorneys quite a bit. So I would call them and say, okay, give me the black and white of the law. And then I'm going to operate in the gray in the middle because I'm going to push it to the edge on both sides. This is what I plan on pushing. And I would get okay, Michele, the law says da 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 da. Okay, well, I want to do this. I'm going to stretch it like this and I'm going to go out as far as I can without breaking the law. Am I going to not break the law? Am I not going to have, someone suing me for this? And they shake their head and they go, okay, but but you have to be able to push, right? To your point.
Yeah.
Policies and procedures are there. It's a structure that's there for us to follow, but how do you operate in the gray in the middle?
Well,
How do you
you
push?
have to have the trust of the organization, like you mentioned, Michelle.
Yeah.
The culture of the organization has to be innovation, right? And not always, but the problem is, I mean, if you follow Myers-Briggs, 60% of us focus on what we've done before and what worked and following rules, right? And so, and that's the way when I worked in government, you know, uh, I loved my job. I worked with the county was my favorite job, and part of the reason it was my favorite job is because when I saw something that was an issue, I could go to my boss and say, "Hey, can we do this?" If I ever broke a law or I broke a policy or wanted to create a new policy or whatever else it was it was for the benefit of the people that I was serving, and that's how I would approach it. And our leadership supported that. I mean, we got three policies changed that really helped make a difference with, um, the clients that we were working with. It was only until I had we had a big meeting with the change that I worked with the chairman of the board of supervisors, asked me a question just off the cuff. How are things going out in East Kern County? So, well, sir, if you really want to know, that started an entire process. And so I actually got in trouble for that, where they said I broke chain of command. I said, how did I break chain of command when that person asked me a question and then wanted me to follow up on that? Well, you should have known better. So that was the impetus for me to say, okay, this isn't the place for me anymore. Right. So, like you said, when we are allowed to explore, I take it that's you said what's the law and where's the gray? I always say just give me a box. Let me know the parameters and then let me color within the lines. I will work really good within your boundaries. I may not work the way you want me to do within those boundaries, but those boundaries set where you want me to go, and I may come up with something that might really make a difference. And as long as people, as long as you're allowed to do that, and you have to feel comfortable enough to do it,
Oh yeah.
right? And if you don't have that trust, it's like, the bottom of Lencioni's pyramid. If you don't have trust, everything else fails.
Yeah.
That's the base of everything.
Yeah. And you need to know the law too, right? You need to know the rules to what Tiffany's saying, right? You need to know those policies and those processes and those procedures and
Yeah.
what they mean and know where you have opportunity in them to flex.
Give me the expectations.
Yeah.
Tell me what is expected of me, and then how often do I need to come and check in with you, right? And things like that. I think Tiff would be like, okay, well, just give me the loose ends. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I didn't know I could do that, but it helped.
No, I'm always like when they're like, what did you do here? And I'm like, oh, I did this because this was in the bed. We're not allowed to do that. And I'm like,
I,
where does it show me where it says I can't do that?
Mhm.
Because I'm very purpose driven. I'm very
yeah,
much about like what needs to get done, and then I'm going to think of the fastest, easiest, most efficient, most effective way to get it done.
Mhm.
Um, but I also again don't want to violate those must do's. But what's really interesting, especially again in my environment, is that the must do's are hidden rules, right? They're hidden rules. They're not always like the law, which is the thing that I'm always arguing about. Like, where in the law does it say that? Well, this is what we do here. But what we are doing here is not working. So let's be willing to try something different. Like, what are we here for? And when I start to have, again, these conversations with people about like kind of pushing the boundaries, um, what's really interesting is people are always like, well, what if I get in trouble? And that's where the coaching approach comes in because I say, well, what is it? What do you mean? What if you get in trouble? What does get in trouble mean to you?
Hmm.
And they say, well, if I try this, my boss might call in and have a conversation. And so that's where I kind of ask, so what is your biggest fear? A conversation? What would go beyond that? Well, probably nothing. So are you willing to keep things as is to avoid a conversation, or are you willing to push the boundaries, try something new, and maybe create the next breakthrough? Like, well, what is most comfortable for you? And when you put it again, that's part of that coach approach, like reflecting back what you're hearing from them. Like, oh, they're not going to fire me over this. I'm not going to get written up. Like the worst thing that happened is my boss might put me in it. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it like that? If that's the worst thing that could happen, what are you really afraid of?
Right. Right.
And that's sometimes again, that's part of that the beauty of coaching is I'm not telling you like you're nothing's gonna happen to you. You're not gonna get fired. Get over it. It's a conversation. That's very judgmental. But when you put people in that position to think, oh, well, yeah, the worst thing that could happen is a conversation. I can deal with a conversation. And
Mm.
some people are like, you know what? I don't want the conversation. That's their journey. I'm not there to tell you what's
Mhm.
right or wrong. Do what you want. Do what you want. But a lot of times people are like, oh, okay, now I have a different perspective. I have all of this fear holding me from maybe I don't trust the system, maybe I don't trust the culture, but also maybe it's all in my head. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe I do have leadership that's supportive. Maybe I do have leadership that wants to try something new. We're just not talking to each other because we're maybe not in the office anymore. Maybe we're not having those one-on-ones that we're supposed to. Maybe we're not having those organic coffee chats over Zoom to just check in and be human beings.
Yeah.
I love what you said so much. I wrote it down that relationships are currency. I have never thought of it that way, Michelle, and that's like I've stolen that from you. So just know that you've made a
Well,
contribution.
thank you. It's not my term. It's actually really Carla Harris is she is the COO of Morgan Stanley, and she believes that we have two types of currencies in a job, and
Mhm.
you have your work education currency and you have your relationship currency.
Mhm.
And as you become more tenured out there in the workplace, your, as Carl said, production currency or work currency actually loses value because
Mhm.
it becomes expectation.
Yeah.
And what really grows in value is this relationship currency.
Yeah.
And that's where that is the big thing. And to get people to think of it in that concept, that's true because you're hired in based on I have this degree, I have this work experience, I can bring this to the table, and that currency is very highly weighted. And as you start to do the job, it decreases, and what grows is this other piece. And
Yeah.
if you don't grow the other piece, you just kind of stay flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's her concept is really nice, and I use it a lot in my coaching practices with new leaders, and believe it or not, even old leaders that are
Yeah.
they've been in their roles for a long time and they can't figure out how come they're not moving, right? Well, how do you advocate for yourself, which is a big conversation in itself. What does
And that's yeah,
advocacy of oneself look like?
yeah. And
Mhm.
that's a big conversation I have with folks who are middle management, who
Mhm.
very often feel most comfortable doing the job of their direct reports or the line
Yeah,
because they came in, that's their expertise, right? And if they came in with that technical currency and they have not developed, I call it intellectual and personal credibility,
yeah,
right? And so you come in with your resume saying you have the intellectual credibility, but you show your personal credibility. You may know all the bells and whistles, all the jargon, all the lingo, and everything else like that. But do you know how to talk to people? Do you know how to connect with them?
yeah.
Do you know how to use that jargon in a way that is motivating and engaging with folks? If not, then you're sitting in a high tower wondering why people are not producing the way that you produced, right? And that's a blame, and so you can throw people under the bus, and that's where that's Uni's pyramid again. So yeah, I totally hear you, and it's so important. How do we build that? and we see it. You talked about her concept. The CATS diagram shows when you come in to a job, you are there for technical skills, but the further you go up the chain, the less technical skills are needed, and the more strategic and personal skills are really important. So
Right.
how do we build those? I mean, we got to get out of that mindset. But if we're just hired based off of our skills, very often the person who hires us, oh, okay, well, it's cut and dry. That person has, they're the highest, the best accountant that we have, so they can manage everyone else how to do the job the way that they do it. Good luck with that,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
Michael Jordan was a terrible coach because he expected everyone to be the greatest like he was, right? And
Being
so
him.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
So I
Wow.
wanted to ask you. Oh no, go ahead, Tiff. If you wanted
No,
to.
no, no. I was just gonna say, like, when I think about even like power in organizations, things like reward power and coercive power and, your legitimate power and your expert power, referent power, which is that power of relationships, is right there with it. And studies have shown that that's the most effective use of power that you could have is the power of relationships.
Yeah.
Um, and I also, with that, I want to just share a quick story, fast story, about like relationships and how important they are. Like this world is so small, and like the way that you treat people and the way that you engage with people and the way that you communicate with people is so important because um, you never know like where your paths may cross in the future. And to share with you really quickly, we were just talking about Winton in the last podcast, remember? Because Carl
Yeah.
called it Wilton, which I forgave him for. But Winton is a small town where I grew up that is about 3 square miles. It's in the very like middle of California. I'm here in this little tiny fishing village in Mexico where I live now. And we went to buy bricks the other day. And my husband was chatting it up with the guy that is the owner. And he was talking about how he went to California to go work in the fields and come back and open this business. And where do you think he was working at? Little tiny Winton.
Oh, wow.
And that
Small.
his dad was the butcher at our little grocery store that we had. And now I have to go in because I went to that grocery store almost every day as a kid. And he might have been my butcher my whole life. And here we are in another country and we cross paths again. And so this is like for me, relationships are so important. And that's why I love this relationship as currency because I must be rich. Because I really try to build nurturing relationships with people and I want to be of service to them and I want to be able and I'm not shy to call if I need you for something, I'll call on you and I can ask for help. Um and I thrive on that. And I wish more people could see the value of other people besides just their productivity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Besides just that transactional nature of work relationships where you do this, I do this, and this is how they fit together. Like if we could really like see the whole person and treat people with respect, give them the benefit of the doubt, to build those like meaningful relationships. And I'm not necessarily meaning like, hi, we work together, Michelle. Let's hold hands and talk about our childhood traumas, right? That's not that's the depth that we're looking for here.
Right.
But to be able to say, you know what, I know Michelle and I trust Michelle. She's an expert in this, and this is how she communicates, and this is how I can get the best out of her. And it's important for me to know like what's important to her so that we can work well together. What are her priorities and what pace does she prefer? Like we can figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
That's the currency, right?
Yes.
That's
Very
the
much so.
currency. And then I can communicate the same thing with Michelle and say, Michelle, I know your priority is this, and here's what I'm prioritizing, and this is the pace that I prefer. Let's find a way to make this work for the both of us in a really trustworthy relationship driven organization. We can have those conversations without fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to me, just in my limited experience on this earth in the workplace, that is 100% the piece that's missing from most organizations. And what
Yeah.
differentiates places that are really successful versus those that maybe struggle, it is that ability to connect and have these genuine working relationships with each other. And so
Because when I
that's
have a
that's
leader,
yeah.
because when I have a leader like that, there's nothing I won't do for him. I'll run through a brick wall for him, right? And Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. So, Michelle, I know our time is a little short, but I just wanted to ask you a couple things. So, the first, what would you recommend for somebody who, hey, I've heard a lot about coaching. I want to, I want to pursue it, but I'm interested. If you've had that conversation with somebody, what do you tell them? What do you tell somebody who's looking into maybe getting into coaching?
Um, into coaching themselves or to hire a coach to help them
Into coaching themselves, into becoming a coach.
into becoming a coach. Um, I think you have to have a service heart. You have to care deeply about people. You have to want to see the growth in them. You have to know a lot about yourself and where you've come from. And, you know, um, I think you have to know your natural gifts. I didn't know my natural gifts. It took me a bit to learn my own natural gifts, or actually to acknowledge my natural gifts. It's not that I didn't know my natural gifts. Um, and I think um, I I think the coaching world is not a place for every. I don't think it's a place that if you come into this world to think I'm coming here to get rich, then this may not be the place for you.
Yeah.
I think if you're coming here because you truly care about people and how people show up and the growth of people and seeing people do great things for themselves, then this is the place for you.
How would you, Tiff? What do you think? How would you add to that?
I think with like the people who can be good coaches or why they might pursue it has to be something bigger than themselves, right?
Mhm.
I love the idea of being in service. Um, but it's interesting because it can't be about you can't have an agenda. You can't have an agenda, but there has to be some purpose. And so that's kind of like a fine line between like where do I let go of my agenda but still walk through this with purpose. And so like personally, like my motto is live your best life, which I know is like a little cliche, but that's literally like the purpose I have is live your best life.
Mhm.
Because what your best life is not going to be the same as mine. But what my purpose is making like the world a better place for everyone.
Mhm.
And so as a coach, that's my agenda, but it's live your best life, not live my best life. And I think that's where I can kind of separate the two. Um, and so I think for people who are looking to get into coaching, you do have to definitely know yourself, but you also have to be willing to set that aside in service to somebody else. And that honestly truly is the hardest part and the most rewarding part all at the same time. It's such a double-sided coin because um your judgment comes in so hard. Like you want I don't know how you all feel about it, but for me when sometimes people are sharing, I want to just be like, well, I can tell you right now the reason you got problems is because of this. But that's not my role and that's not what I'm there for. I have to then just go back into that space of curiosity to say, okay, that's really interesting, that perspective. Like walk me through that a little bit more. Like
Mhm.
tell me about that perspective or how you got there. And so
Yeah.
when people can hear themselves like out loud, that's where I think and I don't know about you all, but there's like this body language. There's this moment where I know I've asked a really good question. It's like the high that I go for as a coach. It's like where I want to start smoking my fake cigarette, like, yeah, got it. Is when you ask that really good question that they go, huh, and they look up to the sky and they're like processing like that moment of like self awareness and that you see that they're really digging deep and that to me is the most rewarding. Like it doesn't even matter what they say after that, it has no bearing on it. As soon as they sit back and look to the sky and they're really processing, I thought, done, I'm good. All right. That was the moment I was hoping for because it just kind of opened up their thought to something new. um And so that's really like, as a coach, I think what you have to be willing to do is allow people to make space to come to their own conclusions and not yours. Like that's not the end game.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's where when when people ask me what's it about, I say, well, two things. First of all, if you're coming in to fix people's problems, then you have the wrong agenda. It's not
Mhm,
about you, and it's really about them coming up with their own solutions. Well, how does that? Well, you got to be patient. You got to listen.
mhm,
And another thing is, there's a big difference between what coaches do and what therapists do. So,
right.
just really have that thought about the structure, learn what it is. If you want, more information, I'll gladly tell you, but, or, give you some information, but you got to be patient. You got to be a good listener, and you got to, leave your ego at the door. This is not about you. As
Mhm,
much as our brain wants to internalize and process and personalize everything, we have to counteract our brain in a coaching session. And it's one of the hardest things I've had to learn to do. And even with the best intentions, I'm a
mhm.
fixer. I love fixing problems, but people do not fix problems in the same way, and not every fix is works for everyone. And you have to be okay with that. And that can be a personal that's personal growth to say, oh, they did it differently and it worked. Shit. Well, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for me? Am I wrong? Right. And so it's such a journey. I really, but it's super rewarding. If you're in for a penny and in for a pound, then I mean, it's great. It's something I'm really glad I was finally able to do. I've been trying to get into that program since you started, Michelle. I was trying to get into 2016. So, you
Mm.
know, and I just was able to finally afford it last year. So just, having that ability. So, and then last
It's
question.
freeing too.
What's
It's
that?
freeing as the
It's
coach,
free.
right? It's
Yeah.
freeing for you that you just get to create this safe space for them to
Yeah.
let them process, right?
You don't
Um,
have to have the answers. Yeah.
you don't have to have the answers. You don't
Yeah.
own the results. For me, the first time when I was in it and it happened, I was like, oh, this is quite freeing. I don't own anything with this. And I'm amazed at how much I could just let go, right? Because before, as a leader, you couldn't, right? You still owned all that stuff.
Yeah.
But oh, it's freeing. It's freeing.
Yeah.
I joke around all the time about coaching. As a coach, sometimes it feels like a scam
Yeah.
because you're not really telling anyone, coming up with any answers. And I say, and I mean this with like all the love in my heart here, that it's amazing how much money people will pay for somebody's undivided attention. And like, what does that say about us as a society, that I have to pay someone money to just hold space for me and let me think out loud?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so I would invite all of us. I mean, even though as professional coaches, it might hurt our bottom line. I think as friends, as partners, as parents, as colleagues, as coworkers, like for the bargain price of on the house, we need to like hold space for people and give them an opportunity to think. Um, and just listen and hear them and see them without any kind of judgment. If we can do that as just individuals, even without the coaching, even without the competencies, even without the credentialing, if we can just make space to just hear people and not try to fix it, imagine like how much better the world would be.
Yeah, I agree.
And recognize we don't have to fix it. That's the difference between leadership and authority, right? Lamar was talking about that last episode.
Yeah.
The difference between leadership and authority, right? Authority is this is my position, so I hold, my decisions carry weight. And when you're in a conversation with somebody and you feel like you're exerting authority, you have to come up with the answers. You have to give the direction. Whereas as a leader in a coaching situation, what is leadership? It's developing, it's growing your staff, it's helping guide people towards the right direction for your team, for your culture. And so you don't have to have the answers. Sometimes the answers come from the line staff. A lot of times culture changing opportunities come from middle management, come from a branch, right? That, hey, this is working here. Can we expand that? And if you have that kind of thinking, let's explore how this works and why this works and how this can work other places. Then, you have that growth as opposed to no, 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 that's not how we do things, right? So such a big difference. And Michelle, I just wanted to ask, we were talking about those coaching questions, and we have our top five every episode. So um, just that idea of the coaching questions. If you were to give your top five, whether they're your favorite or you find the most effective or the most introspective or discovery questions, what would be your top five questions that you would use in a coaching engagement?
Well, I don't have a standard top five because I really believe it's client led at the time.
Mhm.
But I think my most favorite thing to do with a client is more of a visioning type thing.
Mhm.
So, can you envision yourself in that, right? Can you envision yourself stepping into that new role and what would that look like? So I love those because I think that gets them to the place that they could really see themselves doing it, right? Um, type questions. I
Yeah, I
um
love that.
I think a closing question I like to ask at the end for a wrap-up question is based on all of what you've shared today and that you've learned today, what is the one thing you want to honor yourself with as we close out our time?
We're writing these down because now we're
Oh,
going to totally steal them from you, Michelle.
Pilgrim.
No,
Um,
I already have them all written down. All the great questions Michelle gave. I already have a whole book of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Great mentor. Great mentor.
No, I hear that. I love asking, like in a needs analysis, because we're both trainers, right? One of the things that I've really been able to tailor just in my language and needs analysis, what would success look like,
yes,
right?
exactly.
So at the end of this, what would you want your folks to be able to do, or how you would want them to behave, or what does the success look like for you, which you know, is really an important thing rather than, oh, well, we have the prescription. Well, you know, you came to us because hopefully you trust us to get there, but what do you want? What is that end result? And are you okay with it? Maybe, what's the leeway? Because it may
Mhm.
not go exactly the way you want it to go.
Right. I mean, I think a good one too is kind of, when they talk about they need to have this conversation, what does that conversation look like?
Yeah.
And then, and what kind of outcome do you want from that conversation? And I think when you ask them, what kind of outcome do you want from the conversation? That's a big shift. You could
Yeah.
even actually see them shift, like, oh, I never really thought about the outcome of the conversation.
Yeah.
Huh,
Yeah.
really? Tell me more. What would it be?
Yeah.
Mhm. So,
I agree with you. I think a lot of times we get stuck in what we don't want, right? Like we're stuck in, I call it circle in the drain of like the negativity. This is what's going wrong and this is what's not going well. And so when you ask like, well, what would you like to be different?
mhm,
Or, if you have this conversation and it went well, what would be different? I never thought about the finish line. I'm just where I just know I don't like where I'm at right now. So that's such an important question and so many different ways to ask it. But I love that one so much.
mhm,
Yeah.
And I agree with you, Michelle. It gets them like, oh, again, that's the high I'm looking for as a coach. Those moments of pause where they're just like, I never really thought about that. That's when I'm like, okay, now it's not a scam. I'm earning my money. I'm
yeah.
earning
Yeah.
my money.
You're earning your money. Or,
Yeah.
I love words sometimes. Like if, you hear them use a word multiple times, right? Because that's how I take notes. I don't take like long notes. I'm just listening for a pattern of words. And so, if someone uses a word, you know, um, many, many times, I might say, I've heard you say this word a few times. Tell me what that word means to you. Tell me
Mhm.
what's it about,
Mhm.
Curious to know. It goes deeper into things. Body language is a good one that a lot of
Mhm.
coaches don't tap into that competency 6364, those non-verbal cues. They don't get into those at all because they're afraid that it's going to carry them into the therapy side. But it doesn't, right? So if you notice someone, wiggling or doing something, or you need to really ask what's going on with you. What are you feeling with that? I'm noticing, you kind of got real stoic when you said that. What happened?
Mhm.
It goes into a different place, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I say,
Yeah.
coaching is really about trust. The coach needs to trust their instinct, trust that you see something or feel something, and ask that question based on it. And the client will let you know if you're on it. If you're really listening with them, you'll be able to ask it and the client will go, or the client will say no, but you triggered this. And then
Mhm.
it takes you into a different place. That's why I don't really have a lot of canned type questions, because I really want to hear and be in the moment with them.
Cool.
I love that you say that because, I'm sure everybody's had some type of like workshop or something about like how to show you're listening, how to be an active listener and summarize and repeat back and nod your head and smile and all these nonverbal cues to show people that you're listening to them. But when you're really like present and in tune to the conversation, all of that happens naturally. It's nothing that you have to force. It's nothing
Right.
that you have to like, oh, I haven't nodded my head in 10 seconds. Maybe I should nod my head to show them that I'm still paying attention, because you really are giving that time to that person and hearing them. And it's not just hearing their words, but hearing their tone, hearing their, like you say, seeing how they move, how their energy shifts. And that like immaculate presence is where most of I think the breakthroughs come from.
Hmm.
And I, as like a beginning coach, I still don't have as much experience as I'd like to have. Obviously that comes with time and with practice. uh like I do have like a few like go-to questions that when I'm stuck or I'm not sure like how to keep it moving, I love like a question like what else.
Hmm.
What else is like one of my favorite coaching questions, because I think it gets people beyond like what they think they're saying into something a little bit deeper.
Yep.
And
Tell
so
me
that,
more.
yeah. And
Tell
then
me
I
more
love,
is
like you
another
said,
one.
like, what are you taking away? And then I'll just share because I know we have to wrap up here, but I like another one I really love is like, well, what do you have to lose?
Yes,
That's
exactly. You
that
need
one
to do
is,
both sides with them.
yeah. What do you have to gain or what do you have to lose?
That's the
Love,
worst thing was, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
love
yeah.
those questions.
And
But
so
I think the
wrapping up,
rest of them
Michelle,
I had, yeah. I would say I think the rest of them, I think we're all in tune with each other.
and so just wrapping up, Michelle, just using one of your questions, what's one thing that you'd like to honor from our time together today?
I want to honor the openness and the honesty and just the connection with you guys around, this whole thing and where it's going and where your journeys are. And so I want to honor authenticity.
I
Love it,
love it.
love it. That
Because we
that's
stay
that's
keeping it real. Because we
Keeping
that's
stay
it
keeping
real.
it real.
Keep it real.
Keep
Yes.
it
that's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, we jumped the
no,
gun,
that's
but
amazing.
yes, thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us. It was definitely a gift, and we really do value you and appreciate you. So, thanks for hanging with us today.
Thank you
And
for having me.
absolutely, it's our pleasure. And until next time, I'm Carl,
I'm Tiff. And that's Michelle.
and that's Michelle. And as we
We're
all
keeping
said,
it real.
keep it real.
Keep it
Yeah.
real. Bye, guys.
All
Thank
right,
you,
bye,
Michelle.
Michelle. Thank you.